This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
I know it's something that I need to educate myself more on. I have my own personal opinions, but of course I cannot let those influence my professional judgment on this. It is something that I'm hoping that Reform UK is currently formulating a policy on, so that we can have a party policy on where we stand on the whole local government reorganisation.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast. In the week, a Sheppey eatery received a huge fine after employing illegal workers. A Medway man spoke out about how he had to wait for years for a drop curb because of a red tape wrangle. And Reform starts the process of choosing a top team to lead Kent County Council. I'm Simon Finlay, the local democracy reporter covering KCC, and I'm joined by Dan Esson, who reports on Kent's district and borough councils, and Rob Boddy, who reports on Medway Council.
Hello. Hello.
Later on, we'll be joined by senior news reporter Ellie Hodgson, who's been to Parliament this week for a very important meeting with some of Kent's MPs. And this week's special guest is the newly appointed KCC leader, Linden Kemkaran, who tells us all about her plans for the authority following Reform's stunning election win. Rob, what's been happening in Medway this week?
Following on from last week's instances of people having problems with the council's parking and school streets policies, this week I've got something similar, though over a much longer timescale. A man in Stroud has been waiting 4 years without any explanation of the delay for a package of improvements to his house which was promised by his social housing provider, MHS Homes. Now, you might think that this means it's a large-scale reconstruction or something like that, but actually the only bit he was waiting for is the putting in of a dropped curb. The whole package included a wet room and the putting in of a hard standing, which was completed shortly after being agreed in 2021, but the drop curb still hadn't materialised.
So what's the reason for the delay? Has someone dropped the ball somewhere along the line?
I haven't been able to get to the bottom of what actually the 4-year delay was. Medway Council told me a more recent delay was to do with the processing of payments, but said this was not the reason for the 4-year-long wait. MHS Homes were pretty clear-cut, saying the delay for the drop curb was not their fault and instead was down to Medway Council. This was not because of a lack of interest from a man, Michael Partridge. He's sent dozens of letters over the years, and Medway Council and MHS Homes both knew this was a problem because at one point they had 8 people from the council, from the social housing provider, from the contractors, all standing and looking and saying, yep, there should be a drop curb there, but still 4 years later, there wasn't. Fortunately, since we got in contact with the authority, whatever problems there were have now been resolved, and the work has begun in putting in the drop curb.
Funny that, isn't it? When the press gets involved, things get done. There you go. Dan, what have you been looking at?
I've been looking into the licensing woes of a Turkish restaurant on the Isle of Sheppey, but not the usual bid for a late-night booze licence. Instead, they're facing a possible revocation of their licence for a litany of immigration offences.
How'd this come about? What do they do?
So Home Office documents we've seen say that back in January, immigration enforcement carried out a visit to Mems Meze in Halfway. They found 3 people working there illegally, 2 of which had cards showing that they were awaiting asylum decisions and therefore not legally allowed to work, and a third was illegally overstaying a visa. So the Home Office say the managers pretty blatantly hired them in full knowledge it was illegal. Making matters even worse, 2 of those workers weren't even being paid and told the Home Office that they were just getting food and a place to stay in exchange for their labour.
Sounds pretty serious. What's the Home Office going to do about it?
So the business has been slapped with a pretty much immediate 120 grand fine, and Home Office asking Swarborough Council to strip them of their licence full stop. It'd stop them from selling alcohol or opening past 11pm, though they would still be able to trade as a business. The owner tells me that she leased the restaurant out at the time, so wasn't the one responsible for hiring people, but also said she thinks the Home Office have the wrong end of the stick and that it's in fact fine to not pay people if they're being sponsored to be in the country on a visa scheme, and give them room and board instead. Home Office guidance says that in cases like these, revocation of the licence should be strongly considered in the first instance, so at some point in the coming months, Swarborough Council is going to decide on the fate of Mems Meze.
OK, thank you.
So Simon, tell us, what have you been up to at County Hall?
No sooner have Reform UK and the new leader Linden Kemkaran been installed at County Hall that the opposition backlash has begun. Mrs Kemkaran told the media that the Ukrainian flag, which has been on display in the main chamber at County Hall and above County Hall at some point in the past, will be coming down. Reform says that only the county standard and union flag and the flag of St George possibly should fly above the town halls that is now running. And just for the record, she has paid tribute to the Ukrainian people, who she described as amazing, but she said that flying a flag about a foreign war is, in her words, a distraction. There's been a lot of criticism from the Greens and the Liberal Democrats and from other people too, including one woman from Ukraine called Anna that I spoke to, who took a slightly more diplomatic approach, and she said it was disappointing because the UK support is so important to the people there. Anna had just actually come back from Ukraine, where she had been to her dad's funeral, and described the scenes of, complete and utter destruction everywhere that she went. But the image that seems to have stuck with her, in her mind, was the state of the country and the sight of people saying goodbye to their loved ones at bus stops, which was rather a poignant image in my view.
How are Reform getting on in KCC now?
Well, we're going to hear from Linden in a few moments, the new KCC leader. And but so far, from what I can see, they appear to be taking the job in hand very seriously. And, let's face it, it's not going to be an easy one. But it'll be interesting to see what happens when the books are opened up, as Reform has promised to find whether there is waste or departments overstaffed and underworked. Will staff working from home becoming to an end or be put on notice? Are there contracts that could be renegotiated? These are the things that I think that she's keen to have a look at. KCC teeters on the brink of bankruptcy, unable to cover the cost of its legal statutory services amid shrinking budgets in real terms. And Reform inherits the same fiscal problems that the Tories had to deal with when they were in power. And they also have to oversee the dismantling of KCC to make way for unitary authorities in the future. The question still remains about whether the new leader has the skill sets and the experience to fulfil the requirements, as well as oversee all the other big projects, such as the sale of County Hall, and we'll discover whether that or will not happen in due course. But Mrs Kemkaran has not finalised her cabinet positions yet, but I'm hearing some whispers about who might get what, but nothing is yet official. She also told me that she's been made to feel very welcome at County Hall, but as we'll hear, she's friendly and funny, but she's also pretty straight talking, so you'll be able to judge for yourselves. So Ellie, welcome to the podcast for the first time. Could you tell us firstly why you've been up in Parliament, and was it for a Kent Online campaign?
Yes, I was in Parliament yesterday and it was for Kent Online's campaign. It's called the Blue Badge Battle and it's all about calling for a change in government policy around who gets a blue badge. So what that is in a nutshell is we're trying to make the system fairer so those with shorter term mobility issues can access goods and services. So current legislation and Department for Transport guidance states an applicant must have an enduring and substantial disability to be considered for a blue badge. So this is defined as a condition likely to last for 3 years. Now, while obviously there has to be checks and balances to stop the system being abused, there are some people who are having their applications turned down when they genuinely need help, and these are the people we're trying to help.
Okay. So, what made Kent Online adopt this particular campaign?
So it was many readers with cancer and other life-altering conditions that had got in touch with us, multiple phone calls sharing how they'd been unfairly treated by the current process. For example, I've written stories about cancer patients such as Martin White and Sandy Burr, who were denied badges because the council said it was unable to determine their conditions would impact them for 3 years. But in the meantime, both of these people are struggling to park close to their destination and daily errands are becoming really difficult, which is obviously impacting their lives. So we started this campaign, which is backed by MPs from 3 main parties, so that's Helen Grant, Tristan Osborne and Mike Martin, and what we're asking for is that eligibility criteria to be broadened to include those patients with compromised mobility but on a shorter term, more frequent review basis. And since its launch at the end of March, we've also gained the support of Ashford MP Sohan Joseph and Gravesham MP Lauren Sullivan, who are supporting the campaign.
Who did you meet at Westminster and what was decided yesterday?
So yesterday we had a meeting with the Shadow Transport Secretary, Gareth Bacon, and it was attended by cancer patient Sandy Burr and Bev Evans, who suffered a life-changing neck injury. It was also attended by Helen Grant and Tris Osborne, and we shared why the campaign is so important. So the meeting was a success as Gareth agreed to back the campaign, and once we understand whether primary or secondary legislation is needed to change the law, we'll be in a position to decide the next steps. So for now, I'm going to be contacting all of Kent's MPs to ask for their support of this campaign. campaign, and Mike, Tris and Helen will be applying for a Westminster Hall debate. Along with this, we're going to be composing a joint letter to KCC indicating that they have a discretionary power to introduce a policy that will create a temporary pass provision for those with time-limited conditions. So this is a separate approach to seeking to change the law on blue badges, so we're really looking at it from two ends of the spectrum. And the main thing is this is a cross-party campaign, and we're working together to try and ensure the blue badge system is not letting certain people down.
Thanks, Ellie. All the very best with the campaign.
Thank you.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
Last week, following Reform UK's massive win at the Kent County Council elections, Linden Kemkaran was chosen to be the new political leader of KCC. After 28 years in charge of the authority, the Tories have been reduced to just 5 seats compared to Reform's 57. But these are perilous times for Kent, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, while still having to provide services they must by law, such as adult social care. And the new kids on the block may well have to follow the government's planned changes to local government and abolish itself in a couple of years' time. Linden, welcome to the Kent Politics podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much indeed for agreeing to come on. Look, it's been barely a fortnight since Reform swept the boards at the KCC election. Did you really expect to take charge of County Hall?
If I were to be absolutely 100% truthful, it was something we very much hoped to achieve, but did we expect to do it? Well, you know what elections are like. You never know what happens between the voter and the ballot paper in the privacy of that booth. So even though we'd been out campaigning for, some of us have been out campaigning for months, but personally I started my campaign proper probably about 8 to 7 weeks before polling day. And we were very cheered by the reaction on the doorstep. But of course, you can never count on people coming through for you. But on this occasion, they did in great, great numbers. And it was an amazing feeling.
Was there a reception have you had at County Hall since becoming leader of KCC?
I think County Hall is it's an historic building. It's an absolute honour to be sitting here in my leader's office talking to you. My perceptions are it is full of people who are very dedicated to what they do. It's full of very talented people who actually work very hard to serve the elected representatives. And the focus really is, especially now that we are here from Reform UK in such great number, the focus always has been, and I imagine it always will be, on providing the very best service that we can. You've
been in office for about a week. What are your initial thoughts about KCC and the way it has been run?
Well, of course, it's been run predominantly by the Conservatives for a great number of years, almost 30 years. Now, if you think back, I don't know how old you are, but I'm certainly old enough to remember very well 30 years ago, the country was in a very different position. Of course, we just had the new Labour government elected, back in the late 90s. The country as a whole was prosperous and enjoying a real period of growth and development. Look at the country now, and especially look at the county of Kent. Things are very, very different. We are in absolute dire straits financially, not just here in Kent, of course. I think the Conservatives ran the council in the way that Conservatives normally run things. I'm not going to sit here and slag them off. I am a former Conservative, of course, in my previous political life. But I think it's time for a change. I think that's what the people of Kent are absolutely desperate to see. They're tired of the same people running the same departments in the same way, and they voted us in to bring about, seismic change, to really take a fresh approach to how things are run. So that's what we're going to do.
You've got a very charismatic leader in Nigel Farage. Has he given you any advice? Has Nigel been in touch?
I have certainly heard from head office more than once. They are delighted with our success down here in Kent. Of course they are. Over the weekend, I know that Reform UK is planning a series of events and meetings so that all the newly elected councillors from all over the country get some face-to-face time with the people in head office, and we will get our proper encouragement and guidance from then on in. But as you can imagine, we're a new party. Head office is really it's done an amazing job on an absolute shoestring staff-wise. So they have had to get things organised very quickly, as we all have. But I think they've done an amazing job in setting up things so quickly over this coming weekend. And I really look forward to meeting my fellow, council leaders and fellow councillors from around the country and swapping notes and discussing ideas, throwing ideas around as to how we're all going to make an amazing difference to the people who voted us in.
Will you be taking any advice from Nigel Farage?
Of course I'll take advice from Nigel Farage. As you say, he's not only charismatic, he has been around in politics for a very long time. And you know what's interesting? Nigel Farage has hasn't really changed his viewpoints. He hasn't really changed his approach to righting what he sees are the wrongs in this country. He's been fairly consistent over the last quarter of a century. What's happened, and this is really astonishing, is that the country is now changing its view and is largely agreeing with him. That's what I find so intriguing about Nigel Farage. He is a consistent conviction politician, and I think we lack that nowadays sometimes in politics.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Ian, where you're from, what your background is?
Oh, yes. I mean, where do you want me to start? I'm a Kentish girl through and through.
All right. Whereabouts?
Born in Dartford. Then my family moved to just a little rural place near West Kingsdown. And then as an adult, I lived in London very briefly when I was at university. But then I moved back to Sevenoaks to start my family. And then in 2023, so just about a year and a half ago, we relocated to Headcorn, which is right in the middle of Kent.
Am I right in thinking you're starting up a vineyard?
Yes, we are starting a vineyard. And of course, these things all happen at once, don't they? So
yeah, of course, don't they? Yeah.
Preparing a field to plant the vines. And of course, I got elected on the Friday. The vines were planted on the Sunday and Monday. And then I got elected as leader on the Thursday. So it's been, a fairly busy time for everybody in my family.
Yeah. So what was your background prior to coming into politics? And you just mentioned the fact that you're former Conservative. If that's the case, what drew you to reform?
So, yes, I joined the Conservatives after leaving my role as a journalist. So I've done lots of different jobs, from civil service to retail to, all sorts of stuff. But I went to university very late in life for lots of different reasons. So I graduated when I was about 28. And my dream had been to work for the BBC. I really wanted to be a BBC journalist. So that's where I set my sights. I got in, knowing nothing about journalism. I was a complete newbie, but I worked my way up to become a specialist producer and then a reporter. Then I had my children, which kind of knocked me sideways a bit, and I made a very difficult decision to take voluntary redundancy from my beloved job at the BBC so I could actually, work out how to be a parent, because of course that is a massive job all on its own, as any of your listeners will tell us. And then I went back as a freelance. So I was a freelance journalist for, the next decade or so while my children were sort of growing up. And then I felt a bit of a political calling. I could see that things were kind of falling apart around the time of the Brexit referendum. And I just had a very strong feeling that instead of reporting on things and just repeating other people's words, I actually had words of my own that I wanted to contribute to the debate. But of course, you can't do that really as a BBC journalist, certainly not really as any journalist. Your own opinion doesn't matter. So I left the BBC finally after bouncing back and forth for many years and joined the Conservatives. And stayed with them for, I don't know how many years, 6 or 7 years possibly, before joining Reform.
Linda, I just wanted to ask a side note. Obviously, you spent a long time working in the BBC, but something that's a bit of a preoccupation of a lot of people on the political right and some people in Reform is the idea that essentially the BBC is full of lefties. It has this institutionally liberal bias. Do you perceive that to be the case when you were working there or no?
Not at first. I think when I first joined the BBC, I was very politically naive. I think I was very apolitical. I didn't really have strong opinions. I was just very content to sort of drift along and vote for whoever took my fancy. So I probably wasn't very switched on at the beginning of my BBC career. But I think the BBC changed an awful lot between me joining it in the late 90s and me finally leaving it in 2018. That was 20 years, and I saw a huge number of changes. And I'm sad to say, I think the BBC at some point lost the plot, and I think it has allowed itself to become ideologically captured by many different types of ideologies and lobby groups, and it's a very different organisation now to the one that I spent many happy years at. When I joined, for example, it would welcome dissenting voices. I've always been a fairly outspoken person, and that was welcomed. They wanted a different point of view, but I noticed over time that dissenting voices were no longer quite as welcome around the editorial table, and I think that's a shame.
Talking about free speech, you've had quite a lot of criticism about the Ukrainian flag and the fact that it's going to be possibly removed from the chamber because you described it as a distraction, or the foreign war was a distraction. Do you regret having said that now?
Not at all. Why should I?
Can you just explain for our listeners, why you said it in the first place?
Why I said, which bit would you like me to explain?
Well, why you wouldn't have the Ukrainian flag in the chamber or flying from the top of County Hall?
Well, because I think, as I said at the time, when I was first approached by a journalist who asked this question, we are here in Kent County Council to serve the people of Kent. That's all there is to it. And I think having any other flag flying in any other place, either outside this council chamber or especially inside the council chamber, it is a distraction to the job that we are elected to do.
Mm-hmm. You also talked about having an Elon Musk style Doge. That's a government efficiency, in case people don't know that. And you've got to open up the books. What do you think you might find?
What do I think I might find? Well, clearly, at the moment, my time since taking office has been really preoccupied with getting to know my own team, because don't forget, we were really, for all intents and purposes, 57 near strangers. I mean, we knew the local people in our local branches, but there are 57 of us. You imagine having 57 new colleagues and you're suddenly elected as leader of them. I really devoted the first few days, Monday and Tuesday of this week, to meeting in person as many of my team as I possibly could and working out where their strengths and weaknesses lay. So naturally, I have spent quite a lot of time with the chief executive and a few of her deputies because they need to brief me on fairly urgent things that are coming down the track at me, and I need to be as prepared as I can. What do I think I'm going to find? I think we need to look at the way things have been done historically within Kent County Council, and really my Doge person will have the freedom to roam around all of the different departments and apply a degree of analytical thinking and a degree of asking questions that maybe haven't been asked before, just so we can see how things are done and whether we can come up with ideas to do them any differently, which will ultimately improve services for the residents and save us and their money.
Okay. Do you believe that there are departments at KCC which are overstaffed?
I don't know. I can't possibly answer that question yet because I haven't had the chance to go around for myself and meet everybody in every single department, as I'm sure you can understand.
Okay, there's 8,500 people working for Kent Homes.
And not all of them are here, of course. Some of them work off-site, because they're doing hands-on roles within the community.
But there are people who have been working in offices but who have been working from home. And that's become a very big part of the working culture in local government right across the country since the pandemic. And there are many folk at KCC who work away from County Hall for most of the time. Will people be put on notice to come back to HQ or even on a part-time footing?
Well, naturally, one of the first things I was asked when I took office was, what are my plans for working from home? Because, of course, the press loves to seize upon something like that and basically scare the wits out of everybody saying, oh, your new reform leader's going to do this, this and this. I've got no such intentions to cause massive upheaval. Who would do that when they take over an organisation? Only a fool would come in and instantly put all their staff on the back foot by introducing measures that have really wide implications on people's personal lives. Because, of course, we're dealing with people here. We're not robots. We're not machines. We have an awful lot of working parents in KCC who also have caring responsibilities, not just for their children, but for elderly relatives. That is a sad fact of modern life. So the last thing I'm going to do is start demanding that people have bums on seats arbitrarily. It is something I'm looking at. I have asked for the numbers of how many people do currently work from home, but I am a big believer in treating people like adults. I think you get the best out of people. You treat them like adults, engage in a dialogue about how things could be done better. But of course, my focus is on productivity and serving the people of Kent. That is the core of everything I do and every decision I will make.
Okay. Kent is on the front line of illegal immigration via the small boats. We all know about that. And the vast criminal enterprise that runs the cross-channel trade. I mean, as a council, you can't stop the boats or smash the gangs, but you do have to process and house every single asylum-seeking child that enters the country before they're dispersed on the National Transfer Scheme. I mean, do you think that system is fair on Kent?
No, I don't think it's fair on Kent. But unfortunately, as I'm sure you're aware, and your listeners will be aware, we are legally obliged to provide certain services to unaccompanied minors. They fall into the same category of children in care that were already in this country. So that is something I have tasked somebody to start pulling information out about how many of these unaccompanied minors there are. My first priority really is working out how do we know that they are actually the age they say they are, because of course this has been a problem. People coming over saying they are 14 years old and they turn out to be 25. This is actually posing a massive safeguarding risk to children who are already in schools and other placements around the county. That's something I've tasked one of my people to start pulling out data on. So I hope to be able to answer your questions in more detail very soon.
Okay. But, on the face of it, how would you verify somebody's age? What, their dental records or something like that?
From, and this isn't official guidance. This is just people I've spoken to in my time over the last few years, dental records don't always give you a very accurate age. They age it to within 5 years. There are other tests that can be done. I'm not an expert on the forensics of all this, so I really am not going to go into many more details. But clearly, it is something we need to address, because the people that come across on the small boats routinely destroy all their documentation, so they are virtually uncheckable, untraceable when they land on our shores. This is a massive problem. We don't know who these people are. We don't know where they've come from. We don't know their intentions. And we certainly don't know whether they are the age they say they are. It's a massive problem, and we need to start being honest about this, because it's something that is affecting the people in Kent. We are picking up the tab. We are the first port of call for processing these people and keeping them until the government disperses them around the country, which is a whole different issue. But of course, the children aspect is putting enormous pressure on our social services, which are already understaffed and overstretched. So that is a looming big problem that I will have to address.
Okay, just take it back to you sort of said that the dental records aren't always very accurate, but you mentioned that there are other methods of determining someone's real age. Well, what methods would they be?
I'm not an expert. I have no idea. This is all in the brief that I've given one of my staff to start looking at. Okay. You know, it's something we all need to get up to speed with. Again, I hope to be able to come back to you in the future with more details on that once I found out myself.
Okay. Kent County Council is due to abolish itself, along with all the other counties, councils in the county, and that'll happen in a few years' time, and be subsumed into a smaller number of unitary authorities, and the prospect of an unelected mayor. But what do you think of Angela Rayner's devolution revolution?
Well, again, it's one of those subjects. This is a huge subject, and it has been pushed at local councils fairly swiftly from what I can work out. I know it's something that I need to educate myself more on. I have my own personal opinions, but of course I cannot let those influence my professional judgment on this. It is something that I'm hoping that Reform UK is currently formulating a policy on, so that we can have a party policy on where we stand on the whole local government reorganisation.
Okay. Just finally, if you had one phone call with Roger Gough, the guy you've replaced at KCC, what question would you ask him?
Well, Roger is, of course, a really decent man. I know Roger from when I was involved in Sevenoaks Conservatives. I was the chair of the Sevenoaks Conservative Association for a few years. So Roger and I worked very well together there. He's a thoroughly decent human being. And I really hope that we can meet for a coffee soon, if he will have a coffee with me. I'm sure he will, because he's a thoroughly good man who's worked very hard for this organisation. So I do actually hope to have a real life conversation with him as soon as I've got the time to pick up the phone and phone somebody outside of this organisation, because I'm sure you can imagine my days are pretty packed wall to wall at the moment. OK, Council Leader Linden Kemkaran, many thanks again for your time today, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Absolutely, I look forward to it. Thank you very much for having me.
Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, appears to be ramping up the rhetoric around immigration with a speech to announce a tough new set of policies. Some critics said it evoked the Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell, if not actually quoting from it. Words matter, or so they say. Rob, how closely did Sir Keir veer towards the Enoch speech?
Well, I think not very closely, to be quite honest with you. I went back and...
it's not the way it was reported. I mean, the way I heard it on the radio without saying the actual speech itself. And then you hear the quotation from the Powell speech and there's nothing alike.
No, yeah. So I'm planning on sort of writing about this for this week's newsletter, which you can sign up for at kentonline.co.uk/newsletters. Plug. And basically, so I decided to go back and actually read the full Rivers of Blood speech. And the key phrase which everyone's sort of picking on in the Keir Starmer speech is this island of strangers idea. Yeah. Now, Enoch Powell in his 1968 speech didn't use the phrase island of strangers, but did evoke the idea of strangers. But I think it's entirely differently.
So did Frank Sinatra in the song Strangers in the Night. I mean,
the context of Enoch Powell's version is basically a projection that the white British people would become a minority and basically not recognise Britain by the year 2000, I think it was a suggestion. And it would be an alien land to them, basically, because of immigration. Whereas Keir Starmer's suggestion, at least as I read it and I heard it, was that basically a lack of cohesion in society is basically disconnecting everybody from everybody else. Enoch Powell's speech was very much, and I think a lot of people evoke the Rivers of Blood speech, both in favour of it and against it, without really understanding what it was about. It is very much a sort of apocalyptic version of immigration is only a bad thing, and that basically it's a danger. And the title of it, the Rivers of Blood speech, comes from a reference to Virgil's The Aeneid, basically suggesting that a sort of a race war was going to break out if something wasn't done about this. That is a million miles away from what Keir Starmer was saying. So I think it's not a good comparison, and I think actually it didn't
bear scrutiny, did it?
No. And I think the only thing it really does benefit is the idea that immigration is a topic we can't talk about. And that gives power to people who do want to sort of take the harshest view of it and say, oh, you're not allowed to talk about these things anymore because we've been taken over, And I think suggesting that Keir Starmer was anywhere near that really isn't very helpful.
Yeah, it seemed a bit of a confected story. Yeah, it's interesting in a way because Starmer has upped the rhetoric on immigration to try and sort of get back some of that reform vote. Nigel Farage, believe it or not, has actually been toning it down, which is quite interesting. Well, what do you make of it then, Dan?
I think even if the policy works, it won't achieve its, or the raft of policies proposed work.
Yeah, the numbers don't stack up, do they?
Yeah, it won't achieve its stated policy aim and its clear political aim, which is to kind of take wind out of the sails of a rising tide of essentially anti-immigration vote embodied in Reform UK. The Home Office projects that if all these reforms are successful and work as intended, it will reduce net migration by about 100,000 a year to just 600 and something thousand, which is historically unprecedented for most countries, especially for this country. We've had record high immigration for decades and only increasing, especially under the last Conservative government. And even if they manage to reduce the numbers by that much, all the visible signs of high immigration and the pressure it exerts on the labour market will continue. If Kemi Badenoch made a big song and dance saying that it's not going far enough, she hasn't really proposed much specific that I can see. But if they want to go further and actually crack down on immigration, both legal and illegal, they have to take a much stronger hand with it. Britain is a uniquely hospitable place for employers who exploit the labour of immigrants, particularly illegal immigrants, and has a very well developed ecosystem of lawyers who essentially benefit, make their money from keeping people in the country against the will of the government. So, all these sort of technical tweaks to Home Office visa rules are one thing, and English requirements will go some way, but they need to be more willing to crack down on businesses who hire illegal workers, like the one I mentioned earlier in Sheppey. Give the state the power to forcibly close these kinds of businesses. The state, you can't just change a couple guidelines here or there and expect to reverse a gigantic political shift. So even if everything that Keir Starmer wants from this speech comes of it, I don't think it will succeed.
OK, folks, that's your lot for this week. Thanks to Rob, Dan and Ellie for their contributions this week. Don't forget to keep an eye on Kent Online for the latest politics coverage, and you can also sign up for our politics briefing newsletter by visiting kentonline.co.uk/newsletters. And don't miss KMTV's politics show every Friday at 5 p.m. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.